we've been asked, how does ROB2 handle split person designs? So I suppose it depends if they can use the extension for crossover or cluster, depending on which one it most closely represents. So with split person, it's probably cluster. It depends. Again, it depends if each part of the person is given a different intervention or the same. So you can use the extension to those. We've had another question. So it seems that you are going to end up with a review where non-summary findings tables outcomes will not be given a grade assessment, or would the assessment have to be based on risk of bias extrapolated from other outcomes? What are the implications of this for grades and reporting statements for those outcomes? There's nothing stopping people from assessing every outcome in a review, and it actually might make people think more about exactly what outcomes are important for the review, and to try and minimise the outcomes included in the review. But with Cochrane reviews, the main outcomes of importance for both patients and clinicians are included in the summary of findings table. So that's why we recommend at least those, just to try and reduce the workload, but it doesn't stop people from assessing every outcome. I wouldn't suggest extrapolating risk of bias from other outcomes, because the way the outcomes are measured or they're selected, or missing data for particular outcomes may vary.
I think as well, Kerry, I think what we're trying to do, I don't know, as associate editors, is we're trying to kind of, I don't know, maybe sort of get reviews to really just focus on what the important outcomes are, because Cochrane reviews tend to be really big. And, sometimes you get the feeling that, that perhaps you cannot see the wood for the trees. You can kind of lose the focus of a review if you try and do too much. So generally speaking, as an associate editor, I try to, encourage that laser focus on the, on what the key outcomes are really, and the key comparisons, particularly because ROB2 is quite time consuming. So I'd rather people did a few kind of judgments really well than try and do too many judgments and not have enough time to do them all properly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, Rachel. How should we refer to the risk of bias tables containing the judgments, comments in the text in RevMan Web? It doesn't have a table number that can be linked, so is there a best way to refer to it when describing the results of the risk of bias assessments? We just say to refer to the risk of bias tables, because they will be, you can't see them, how they will look in the publication in RevMan Web, but they will be there, which you'll be able to see in the PDF. So you won't be able to link to them. The review I'm going to show you is linked to the characteristics of included studies tables, and the judgments are there. So again, that's another way. Do the full risk of bias 2 assessments need to be published by the review team on a separate website? Are there requirements for how these should be archived to ensure ongoing availability? We just recommend that the answers to the signalling questions are made available. I mean, it really does depend on the number of outcomes and the number of studies included. If it's a huge document, we've advised that it should be on an online repository and then the link included within the review. Some teams have included it in appendix. Some teams have said available from the author on request, but they've summarised it really well in the risk of bias tables. So in the risk of bias tables, you really need to summarise the answer to each question for that to be appropriate.
Again, that's another argument for keeping your assessment, with the laser focus on the assessments that really matter. Yeah. So you're not giving yourself too much work.
Is it mandatory to answer all the signalling questions for each domain? Yes, it is really. I mean, if you read the risk of bias guidance, if you get to one domain and assess it as high risk, there is a possibility to stop then, but we don't really recommend that because we want the review to be transparent and to sort of have all the information for that particular study and outcome within the review. So that is an option to stop when you get one as high risk, but it's not ideal. Okay, split person designs usually use different interventions on different legs. Okay, because I spend a lot of time making authors stop talking about outcomes in other non-grade ways. Sorry, Jill, do you want to unmute and speak? And
sorry, I was just sort of responding in the chat, so I wasn't interrupting anybody. So I was just I'm just sort of operating as a methods advisor at the the group level at the moment, and we get people are adamant that they want lots of outcomes, and then they need firmly telling that they really have to use grade in the way that they're reporting them. I'm just a bit worried about people who've got protocols already, in the system with Rob 2 in them, who are going to turn up and say, well, we've done Rob 2 on these 4 outcomes that are in the summary of findings table. However, we feel entitled to talk about the other outcomes in these slightly random ways, in our sort of method, in our results and discussion. And that I'm just sort of, I guess I'm really seeking to sort of some advice on how to handle that, because they are, they're obviously going to want to synthesize all their outcomes, but they may not have done risk of bias 2 on all of the outcomes, because we don't make them if they're not going in the soft table.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with them summarising them in the effective intervention section.
Yeah.
But then when they're actually coming to the conclusions of the review, that's usually based on we look to see the consistency between summary of findings table, the abstract, the plain language summary, and make sure that's all included. So that's why we're recommending at least those in the summary of findings table. But it's not stopping people from doing all of the outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, I am quite in sympathy with people who don't want to do it for eight outcomes if they don't have to, and they've got, the 5 that they really do need done. I'm just trying to, I guess, sort of find a way through, because I can just see people starting to talk about statistical significance all over again.
Yeah. I mean, I just refer them to the checklists, and coming directly to the method support unit. If they're not listening,
I'll grass them up to you. Thank you.
And as well with the split person designs, I think it'd be the cluster extension. It might you just might have to look at the question and
quite
apply it. No, I know it's not quite the same, but it's sort of looking at those additional domains and seeing how it applies to.
I mean, a lot of people never see these, but we have people who are really keen on randomizing bilateral wounds in that way.
Yeah, I know it's quite common in some groups. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Given risk bias 2 is results based, should any risk of bias be presented in the characteristics of included studies tables? I'm just going to go on to show you that now, Tom. And I know you've been in touch about Prisma. So it is really interesting that item 18 of the Prisma 2020 statement is to present assessment of risk of bias for each included study. But not all studies will have, because it's results based. I've actually been in touch with Matthew Page, who is the lead author on the 2020 statement, and I know he's involved. He was involved in risk of bias 2 as well. So I haven't got a response at the moment, but each study could technically be assessed if it had reported the outcome of interest. And because risk of bias 2 is results based, it doesn't make sense to assess it if it hasn't reported an outcome of interest. But then this is going back to the specifying the summary of findings tables outcomes, and that those are the ones that you would assess. If you wanted to assess every review outcome, it is likely that you will be assessing every study. And then they do present in their elaboration document for Prisma 2020 examples using risk of bias 2 as well. So basically, I only apply risk bias 2 to summary findings outcomes. All the other outcomes are not robbed too. Yeah, well, that is what we advise within Cochrane. Other journals may be different, but within Cochrane, we say at least those in the summary findings table. So I'm just going to go on to show you a few other things. So I'll start off with Rachel, can you see the risk bias website? Yeah, okay, great. So this is the Risk Bias Info website that has all of the information on Risk Bias 2. It has the most up-to-date version. It has the versions for cluster trials and crossover trials, and it also has the Excel tool as well. So if you click on current version, you've got the Excel tool, and you've also got the document that contains all of the detailed guidance for Risk Bias 2. And then hopefully now you can see the Excel tool. I'm looking for a thumbs up from Rachel. Okay, thanks, Rachel. So this is the tool that we do recommend that people use. There is a Word document available as well, but you would need to complete one Word document for each outcome for each study, so you would end up with a lot of documents. So this is the tool. It comes up with this nice sort of form for you to complete. So for each domain, so you would need to create an assessment ID and a study ID, and you can put in who the assessor is, and then you can specify which outcome and the result that you're assessing, and then also that it's important to specify your whether you're interested in the assignment to the intervention, so the intention to treat effect, or adhering to the intervention. So if we select that, we can go through and answer the questions. So was the allocation sequence random? Yes. Allocation concealed? Probably yes. And the baseline differences between intervention groups suggest a problem with the randomization process. I'm going to say no here. And then this, if we click on algorithm, that would give us our risk of bias. And then we can either agree with that, we can say we think it's low as well, or we can disagree, but we would ask that you justify that. So that would give you your risk of bias for that particular domain. If you don't want to go back to the detailed guidance document, if you double click on the question, it brings up this box that sort of summarizes the question for you and tells you how to answer. Sometimes you will need to refer back to the full guidance document. You can write your text to back up, so you can copy and paste quotes from the trial report, and you can put your information there. And then when you're coming up to summarizing the domain, if you just double click, it'll copy all of the text that you've put in those two sections here, and you can edit it in this section as well. And as Elizabeth said, it's really important to just check your spelling, check it's grammatically correct, because then this is what you would copy into RevMan Web. So you can go through and do that for all of the domains, answer all of the questions, and then you would have your overall risk of bias. So you can see here, it's already got the low risk for randomization process, and then it would complete that for all of the other domains. And then you would click on the algorithm and it would give you your overall risk of bias as well. So if you save that, then you can look at the summary, the results, and that would have your assessments in, and there would be one row per study per outcome. So say we would have this outcome is mortality, and then quality of life, and this is all for the same study. So this is for study A. So study A reports 4 of the review outcomes of interest. You would have 4 rows completed. So I think we've got some questions. The Excel file is on, thanks Andrew, it's on the riskofbias.info website. you can use this form and Excel file for non-Cochrane reviews, yes, but obviously in both types of reviews, it's important to reference the Excel file and the Riskbased 2 tool. Okay, Alison's said that you need to be careful where you save the Excel spreadsheet. It doesn't like Teams.
There's a question from Sarah as well, Kerry, just a bit higher up.
Yeah. And the number of studies will vary among outcomes, as not all of the studies are included for each outcome. No, that's correct. So it would be all of the studies that reported whichever the review outcomes of interest that you're assessing. So so here we've got study A has reported 4 outcomes, so quality of life. I can't think of any other outcomes off the top of my head. So outcome 1 and outcome 2. And then you may have study B that's assessed 6 of the outcomes, 5, can't count, 6 of the outcomes. So then, you know, that's reported outcomes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So you would do it like that. Study ID. So that can be created, Elizabeth. So if we go into the Riskbased 2 assessment form, don't know why that's not coming up. Okay, here. Sorry, it's on my other screen. So so you would have your assessment ID, and then you would your study ID would be so say DWAN 2022, and then your assessment ID, so you'd have study A outcome 1, and it's important that the assessment ID is the same for the different assessors. So, you know, you need to make sure you have the same assessment ID, because you can use this document as well to do a discrepancy check between your reviewers. So you would you click on here, and that would have your discrepancy check between the 2 independent reviewers. So you need to make sure the assessment ID is the same, and the study ID would be the name of the study. Okay, so that's the Riskbased 2 the website, and there's also a visualization tool as well that can be used. So you can use the in RevMan, you can use the figures to generate the graphs for Riskbased 2 in the traffic light in the forest plots, but this also creates figures how you would used to seeing them in the previous Riskbased tool. Okay, and then I'm going to show you it in a recently published review on cannabis and cannabinoids for symptomatic treatment for multiple sclerosis. So this has been recently published on the Cochrane Library. And you can see here, this is the included studies table, and it's got the risk of bias using Riskbased 2. And if you hover over the assessment, it'll give you the justification for that. And how we get to that is if we go to analyses, and you click on your analysis, and you've got your study that you want to add the risk of bias for, you go to action and edit risk of bias, and that allows you to populate the risk of bias for this outcome for this study. So you put your judgments, some concerns, and you put your justification in. So for each domain, and then for the overall risk of bias as well. So then we come out of that, and you can go to options, and you need to tick this show risk of bias table box in order for that particular outcome to show in the risk of bias tables. And for graphs as well, if you want to show the traffic lights on the forest plot, you need to tick there show risk of bias summary. So for the outcomes that aren't included in your summary findings table, or the outcomes that you haven't assessed for risk of bias 2, you would need to make sure that these aren't checked, so that nothing appears in the risk of bias tables or forest plots. Also going to the results. So you can see here, we've referred to the characteristics of included studies tables and the relevant analyses where risk bias 2 is shown. And you can see here it's been summarised by outcome. For the spasticity outcome, we assumed an overall risk of bias with some concerns, as the trials reporting the outcome were of some concerns. So it's summarised it by outcome. And in some places picked out what the particular issues were. So if it's low risk of bias, you know, there won't be much to say about the outcome, but if there's some concerns or high risk, you can point to what the particular concerns are for that particular outcome. So for example, whether it's there's a lot of missing data for a particular outcome for a certain reason. Or here, we analysed quality of life as continuous data, and the risk of bias was high because these studies, the outcome data, were not available for all participants. The data were not analysed in accordance with the pre-specified plans, and the ascertainment could have differed between the intervention groups. So it's telling us for each outcome what the issues are. And I was going to demonstrate the interactive table as well, wasn't I? Let me just stop sharing and find that on the. Rachel, can you just have a look at the chat? I think we've got a few questions.
Yeah. From Alexandra, do we need to perform a risk of bias for qualitative synthesis if we are not able to run a meta-analysis?
For qualitative synthesis, if your study reports the results that you're interested in, then yes, you need to make that assessment. You won't be able to put it in the same way into RevMan Web, but if you're producing a table of the outcomes, we suggest that you put the overall risk of bias, add that as a column into the table, if you're narratively talking about the results. So as long as a study has reported an outcome of interest, then you would make the assessment whether you're putting it in a meta-analysis or whether you're just including it qualitatively. Sorry, I'm just trying to find this review. Are there other questions?
Yeah, there's one from Elizabeth. Are there plans to create a means of importing judgments into RevMan Web, as pasting each in is very time consuming and prone to errors?
Yes, it is in the works. I think the RevMan Web team are waiting on the Risk of Bias 2 team because they were going to create an online version of the Excel tool. I'm not sure where that's up to at the moment, but I will find out. But I know it's something we have requested in the past.
And a question from Jill. Can I ask how you would relate ROB2 to ROB-MEN, please? So ROB-MEN is risk of bias due to missing evidence.
Yeah. So that's done in an addition. It's not being approved for use in Cochrane reviews yet, but I know it's referred to in the handbook. There isn't a facility to do it in RevMan Web at the moment. As from what I recall, they were piloting the tool that I last heard. So risk of bias due to missing evidence is thinking about publication bias. So studies that haven't been published, and also studies that have been published but haven't reported the outcome of interest. So it's there's signalling questions available for that tool, and you would do that in addition to risk of bias too. I'm just going to share, before we just carry on, I'm just going to share this interactive table. Can you see that, Rachel?
No, sorry, Kerry, I can't. I can still see your web page is open. There it is. Yeah, I can see it now.
You see it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's up.
Okay, so this is how the Riskbased 2 table will look in the published review online, and it's interactive. So here you can see we've got the judgments, we've got some concerns and low risk. And if I wanted to see why Colin was of some concerns for the randomization process, I would just click on that and it would open up the judgment and tell me why that was some concerns. If I wanted to look at the randomization process across all of the studies, I could click on that and it would open up the judgments for all of the studies. So it is quite it's quite a nice way of displaying the risk of bias judgments in the online review. So you can see there, so that's all of the judgments for Colin. Okay, so just if we could just go over the questions now.
I think Elizabeth we were talking about narrative synthesis before, I think. Yeah.
Oh, right, okay, so.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Elizabeth meant to send the message.
Sorry, I assumed the person meant, sorry, Alexandra, yeah. I assumed you meant narrative and not qualitative.
Yes, thank you, Alexandra.
How can we use RevMan Web for non-Cochrane systematic reviews, please? I think you can pay for it. I
don't know, Kerry, sorry.
No, I don't know. I can find out. It'll probably be available if there's I'll just try and find the web link, the RevMan web knowledge base. It might be in here. So if you have a look in there, and that's also got information on risk of bias as well. That also shows you how to edit risk of bias in RevMan Web. So I think there's a really helpful video in that on that link that shows you how to do it. But I will follow up, Elizabeth, on where we're up to in developing that facility that imports the judgments.
And Jill Norman is saying that it'd be good to have RevMan Web more available because people are not happy or finding RevMan 5 clunky.
Oh, here you go. Ruth sent a link about RevMan for non-Cochrane reviews. RevMan Web is now available on a subscription basis for the creation of non-Cochrane reviews or other evidence synthesis work. Yes, so that's another point as well. You can't actually use Risk of Bias 2 in RevMan 5. It's only available in RevMan Web. So in RevMan 5, it would be the previous tool and study-based